This is Joe Biden, the current resident of the United States. If you're one of those unfortunate enough to have to watch Joe stammer through speeches day after day after day like me, you might recognize the following phrase.
Our world stands at an inflection point.
And we face an inflection point.
As we stand at this inflection point in history,
We're at an inflection point.
we're at an inflection point.
We now face an inflection point.
We're at an inflection point in history.
Make no mistake about it, we're living at an inflection point in history.
Now, inflection point was originally a mathematical term to describe the point at which the slope of a line, tangent to a curve, changes from positive to negative, or vice versa. Look, I know if you're lost, I get it, but I promise you that it will make more sense later. Anyway, inflection point has been co-opted to be used in the world of politics to indicate great change.
We're at an inflection point in the history of this country.
I believe America is at an inflection point.
Today we face an inflection point.
An inflection point.
An inflection point.
We are really at one of those inflection points.
Look, we're at an inflection point.
So instead of saying, we're at a turning point or we're at a crossroads, Biden says inflection point because it sounds more serious and gives it more weight. And also, according to Joe Biden, inflection points are pretty rare.
We meet tonight at an inflection point. One of those moments that only a few generations ever face. You know, we are at an inflection point that occurs every 3 or 4 generations. It comes along every 4 or 5 generations. It's happened every 5, 6 generations throughout history. Things are changing. Let me say it, I'm sure it's at an inflection point. It happens every 6 or 8 generations where so much changes in the world. Anywhere from 40 to 80 years in America, there's an inflection point. We have to choose what direction we're going to go.
And it happens every some 50 to 75 years. And folks, I know you may not agree, but I, honest to God, think we've been delivered to one of those inflection points in American history that hasn't occurred since the 30s.
So inflection points in history happen once every several generations, but the last one occurred 90 years ago or something. So what is the catalyst for this rare inflection point that Biden claims is happening now? Is it race relations, the war in Ukraine, climate change? Well, it doesn't matter, because Joe Biden has been saying that we're at an inflection point for decades.
I call these inflection points.
We are at an inflection point. The world is changing whether we like it or not.
An inflection point.
I call them inflection points. Great change only occurs at those inflection points. And we're at one of those points right now. As many have said, America's at an inflection point. There comes times where there's an inflection point, where we go from making incremental progress to making significant progress.
But an inflection point that's not what it is, Joe. Again, so that we're all on the same page and have a bare minimum of understanding, an inflection point occurs when the concavity of a line on a graph changes either from positive to negative as seen here, or negative to positive as seen here. Every such instance is an inflection point. To put it more simply, the point where the line goes from concave upwards to concave downwards is the inflection point.
This is not hyperbole. This is real. This is genuine. This is real. You've heard me say all along when I was running and since I've gotten here, the world's at an inflection point.
But the way he's using inflection point is dubious. Let me clarify. Let's say that this line indicates politics or policy or whatever. Technically, if we're at the inflection point, the line is already heading either into negative territory or positive territory. But none of this matters because Joe Biden's been saying that we're at an inflection point since the Biden-Obama administration.
We've reached an inflection point.
Which proves that the more things change, the more things stay the same.
We're at an inflection point in world history. Things are changing.
Anyway, Joe Biden repeats the phrase inflection point so much that he annoys anyone and everyone who is forced to listen to him.
I believe America, and you're tired of hearing me say it, I'm sure, is at an inflection point. And as you heard me say before, many times, I apologize for repeating it, but the world's at an inflection point. We really are. I know you're tired of hearing me say this. We really are at one of the inflection points in history.
He knows that you're tired of hearing him say it, and he knows that he's repeating himself, and sure, he overuses it, but he could give a crap. He's gonna say it anyway.
I know it's an overused phrase, but I've been using it a lot. We're at an inflection point. Again, I apologize for repeating myself, but I know many of you heard me say, I think we're at an inflection point in history. It's an overused phrase these days, but it's still accurate. We're at an inflection point in American history.
We're at an inflection point. I know I've maybe overused that phrase, but it is an inflection point.
We stand at an inflection point. I know you're tired of hearing me say this when I was running, and I continue to say it every day.
And I guarantee that Biden's going to say that we're at an inflection point until his dying day, even though he has no idea what it means. Because when Biden tries to explain what an inflection point is, it's always wrong and it's always stupid.
We're at what they used to call in our math classes. We're at an inflection point here. It's like driving an automobile. You're heading straight. Once you make the commitment to turn, you turn. And as you're turning, at one point you're dead straight again. And at that point, when you turn, there's no turning back. You're set on a direction. You're not going to be able to change.
So you're in a car and there's no turning back and you can't change direction? You ever hear of a U-turn, Joe?
Remember from your physics class, your hands are in the steering wheel, the automobile is going straight, and one slight turn sends the car in a direction fundamentally different and initially unalterable than the direction it's been going in.
First, Biden said he learned this in math class, which would make sense, as an inflection point is mathematical. But then he says he learned it in high school physics?
I used to have a professor in undergraduate school who said inflection points where you're going down the highway 50 miles an hour and you take an abrupt turn right or left.
Oh, now he learned it in college. Yeah, sure. But more importantly, if you abruptly turn the car 10 to 12 degrees, you're eventually going to run off the road and wreck your car.
An inflection point is when you're riding down the highway at 60 miles an hour, your hands on the steering wheel, and you turn it abruptly 2, 5, 10 degrees one way or the other, and you can never get back on the path you were on.
According to Professor Biden here, when you turn your car as little as 2 degrees, that's an inflection point. Got it.
You're going down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and you rapidly turn in one direction 5 degrees, and never get back on the same path again.
So you can never get back on the same path again. Well, unless you turn the wheel back 10 degrees, I don't know.
I had a professor who said an inflection point is when you're going down the highway at 65 miles an hour and you radically turn 5 degrees to the right. You can never get back on the course you were on.
So I'm going to guess that he didn't actually learn this in school and is making it up, you know, like everything else that comes out of his mouth. But if he did, his professors were morons, which would explain Biden's poor academic performance.
I played freshman football at Delaware and ended up low at, I shouldn't say this, but you had to have a 2.0 to keep going. I had a 1.99, and my mother made me quit.
And of course, it's ironic that the least intelligent president in modern history has the honor and privilege to incorrectly tell 1,000 Air Force Academy graduates what an inflection point is.
I had a professor who used to say an inflection point is when you're driving your car down the highway at 60 miles an hour and suddenly you turn the wheel 10 degrees. You can never get back on the same track you're on before.
So this 1.99 GPA genius gets to give a speech to 1,000 graduates with Bachelor of Science degrees at an institution that he would have flunked out of. F***ing clown world, am I right? Anyway, with all that said, here's a pro tip to all of you Democrats and Republicans. Stop using inflection point in your speeches and remarks because A, it's stupid, and B, because, I mean, you really want to be like Joe Biden? Come on, man.
Folks, I truly believe we're living at an inflection point. The world is changing. We're at a significant inflection point. I believe we're at an inflection point in world history, or what we call inflection points. We're at a great inflection point. Look, we're at one of those inflection points in world history.
Well, inflection where one of those moments where everything's changing. Everything's changing.
Anyway, that's it for now. Follow me on Twitter at Don'tWalkRun. Be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. If there is next time.